Hello and welcome back. I'm from the private Audiobooks channel, and in this video, I'll be with you. The topic of this video is the power of doing hard things. Whether you're trying to fall asleep or commuting after work, it doesn't matter where or how you are, just put on your headphones and enjoy this audiobook video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be notified of future daily audiobook videos. You can also find previous audiobook videos in the playlist titled 2-Hour Audiobooks in the cards. Ready? Let's get started. Chapter 1: The Mind That Runs from Difficulty. You wake up in the morning and your mind begins its familiar negotiation. The alarm sounds, and within seconds, a quiet voice suggests you could sleep just 10 more minutes. You know you plan to exercise before work, but another voice chimes in, softer and more persuasive, reminding you how tired you are, how much you deserve rest, how tomorrow would be a better day to start. Before you've even opened your eyes fully, you've made a choice. And that choice, small as it seems, reveals something profound about the architecture of your mind. This isn't laziness. This isn't a character flaw or a lack of discipline, though you might have told yourself that story many times before. What you're experiencing in that moment is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. Your brain is protecting you. It's conserving energy. It's steering you away from discomfort and toward ease. And in the environment where this machinery was forged, where calories were scarce and threats were everywhere, this impulse kept your ancestors alive. But you don't live in that world anymore. The threats you face today are not the ones your nervous system was built to handle. The discomfort you avoid is not the kind that signals true danger. Yet your brain hasn't received the update. It still operates on ancient software, treating difficulty as a threat, effort as a risk, and comfort as safety. This is where the trouble begins. The human brain is an extraordinary organ, capable of abstract thought, creativity, and complex problem solving. But it's also remarkably efficient, always looking for shortcuts, always seeking the path of least resistance. Neuroscientists call this the principle of neural efficiency. Your brain wants to automate as much as possible, to turn repeated actions into habits that require minimal conscious effort. This is why you can drive a familiar route without thinking about each turn, why you can tie your shoes without concentrating on each loop and knot. Automation frees up mental resources for more important tasks. The challenge is that your brain doesn't distinguish between useful automation and harmful avoidance. It doesn't ask whether the discomfort you're fleeing is actually dangerous or simply unfamiliar. It doesn't evaluate whether the ease you're seeking serves your long-term growth or quietly erodes it. Your brain simply calculates the immediate cost of action and pushes you toward whatever feels less demanding in this moment. When you choose the easy path, your brain releases a small flood of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and pleasure. This isn't just a nice feeling. It's a signal that tells your brain, this was a good decision. Remember this pattern. Do this again. Over time, these small dopamine hits create neural pathways that make avoidance feel natural, even automatic. The more you choose comfort, the more your brain wires itself to choose comfort again. You're not weak. You're conditioned. This is the biological foundation of procrastination, of resistance, of the feeling you get when you know what you should do but find yourself doing something else instead. It's not that you don't care about your goals or that you lack ambition. It's that your brain is solving for immediate relief rather than long-term fulfillment. And every time you follow that impulse, you reinforce the pattern. But here's what most people don't realize. The discomfort you feel when facing something difficult is not the difficulty itself. It's anticipation. It's your brain predicting effort and sounding an alarm. Studies in cognitive neuroscience show that the anticipation of a challenging task often creates more stress than actually doing the task. You've probably experienced this yourself. You spend hours dreading a difficult conversation, imagining all the ways it could go wrong, feeling your stomach tighten at the thought of it. Then, when you finally have the conversation, you realize it wasn't nearly as bad as you feared. The suffering was in the waiting, not the doing. Your brain has a negativity bias, a built-in tendency to give more weight to potential threats than potential rewards. This bias made sense when a missed opportunity meant hunger but a missed threat meant death. Better to be overly cautious. But in the modern world, this bias distorts your perception of difficulty. It makes challenges look bigger, more dangerous, and more overwhelming than they actually are. It convinces you that avoiding discomfort is protection when it's often just postponement. Think about the last time you procrastinated on something important. Maybe it was a project at work, a difficult email you needed to send, or a personal goal you kept putting off. If you examine that experience closely, you'll notice something. The discomfort wasn't constant. It came in waves, mostly when you thought about the task, when you imagined yourself doing it, when you considered the effort it would require. The moment you actually started, something shifted. The anticipation faded. The task became real, concrete, manageable. You might have even found yourself thinking, "This isn't as bad as I thought." That moment of starting is where the battle is won or lost. Not in the doing, but in the decision to begin. Your brain will offer you 1,000 reasons to wait. It will tell you you're not ready, not prepared, not in the right mood. It will suggest that you need more information, more time, better circumstances. And if you listen to these voices as if they were facts rather than evolutionary noise, you will stay stuck in the place where difficulty feels impossible rather than simply uncomfortable. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning, decision-making, and impulse control, is constantly in negotiation with the limbic system, your emotional center that responds to immediate threats and rewards. When you face a difficult task, your limbic system sounds the alarm. It registers the effort required as a potential threat to your resources. Your prefrontal cortex, meanwhile, understands the long-term benefits of doing the hard thing. But here's the crucial detail: the limbic system is faster and often louder. It evolved to keep you alive in situations where thinking too long could get you killed. So it throws up emotional resistance before your rational mind can fully engage. This is why difficulty often feels like fear. Your body responds to the prospect of hard work with the same physiological signals it uses for danger. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles tense. You feel a flutter in your stomach. These aren't signs that something is wrong with the task. They're signs that your ancient alarm system is treating effort as risk. And when you interpret these bodily sensations as evidence that you should avoid the task, you're letting prehistoric programming make decisions for your modern life. Understanding this mechanism changes everything. When you feel that resistance, that pull to do something easier, you can recognize it for what it is: an outdated survival response, not an accurate assessment of actual danger. You don't have to make the feeling go away before you act. You just have to act while the feeling is present. This is what people often misunderstand about courage. They think brave people don't feel fear. But brave people feel fear and move forward anyway. They've learned that the feeling of resistance is not a stop sign. It's just weather. Now, let's talk about what happens when you consistently choose the easy path. On the surface, it might seem harmless. You sleep in instead of exercising. You watch another episode instead of working on your project. You avoid a difficult conversation. Each choice feels small, even insignificant. But these choices accumulate in ways you don't immediately see. Every time you choose ease over effort, you're not just avoiding a task. You're sending yourself a message. You're telling yourself, through your actions, that you're someone who backs down when things get hard. You're teaching yourself that your comfort is more important than your commitments. You're building evidence that you can't be trusted to follow through. This erosion of self-trust is the hidden cost of chronic avoidance, and it's far more damaging than the specific tasks you leave undone. Self-trust is not a feeling. It's not something you build through affirmations or positive thinking. It's a byproduct of action. When you say you'll do something and then you do it, especially when it's difficult, you create proof for yourself. You build a track record. You become someone who keeps promises to yourself, and that internal reliability becomes the foundation of confidence. Not the loud, performative kind of confidence that announces itself, but the quiet, unshakable kind that simply knows it can handle what comes. When you avoid difficulty, you rob yourself of these moments of proof. You stay in a state of untested potential. You might tell yourself you could do the hard thing if you really had to, but you never find out because you never really try. This creates a strange kind of psychological limbo where you're neither failing nor succeeding, just existing in a space of perpetual maybe. And that space, comfortable as it might feel in the moment, becomes a prison over time. There's another layer to this. When you consistently choose the path of least resistance, your tolerance for discomfort gradually shrinks. Think of discomfort tolerance like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. The less you use it, the weaker it becomes. If you only do things that feel easy, your definition of what counts as difficult expands. Tasks that once seemed manageable start to feel overwhelming. Challenges that you used to handle without much thought suddenly require enormous mental preparation. Your comfort zone doesn't stay the same size when you're always inside it. It contracts. This contraction happens slowly, almost imperceptibly. You don't wake up one day unable to handle difficulty. It's a gradual narrowing of your capacity. You start avoiding small discomforts. Then slightly bigger ones. Then anything that requires sustained effort. Before long, you find yourself stressed by things that wouldn't have bothered you before. You find yourself overwhelmed by normal demands. You find yourself wondering when life got so hard, not realizing that life didn't change. Your capacity to meet it did. The psychological term for this is behavioral activation, or rather, the lack of it. When you stop engaging with difficulty, your world shrinks. You do less. You try less. You risk less. And as your behavioral repertoire narrows, so does your sense of agency. You begin to feel like life is happening to you rather than something you're actively participating in. This feeling of powerlessness then reinforces the avoidance pattern. You avoid because you feel incapable, and you feel incapable because you avoid. It's a cycle that feeds itself, and breaking it requires interrupting the pattern at the level of action, not feeling. This brings us to the psychological relationship you have with difficulty itself. Most people see difficulty as an obstacle, something standing between them and what they want. And in one sense, that's true. But it's an incomplete truth. Difficulty is also the mechanism through which you grow. It's not an unfortunate barrier to development. It's the necessary condition for it. Your brain doesn't get sharper by thinking easy thoughts. Your body doesn't get stronger by lifting light weights. Your character doesn't deepen by taking the path of least resistance. Growth happens at the edge of your current capacity, in that uncomfortable space where you're not sure if you can do it but you're trying anyway. That space is where adaptation occurs, where your nervous system learns new patterns, where your sense of self expands to include new capabilities. When you reframe difficulty this way, when you see it not as something to be avoided but as something to be engaged with, your entire experience changes. The discomfort doesn't disappear. That would be a false promise, and I won't make it. But your relationship to the discomfort shifts. Instead of seeing it as evidence that something is wrong, you start to recognize it as evidence that something is happening. You're growing. You're expanding. You're becoming capable of more than you were yesterday. This shift in perspective is not about forcing yourself through misery or glorifying suffering. It's about understanding the difference between productive discomfort and destructive harm. There's a difference between the burn of a muscle being worked and the pain of an injury. There's a difference between the nervousness of trying something new and the anxiety of ignoring your own well-being. Learning to distinguish between these experiences is part of developing wisdom about difficulty. You've probably heard people talk about embracing discomfort, about learning to love the hard things. And while there's truth in that direction, it can sometimes sound like you're supposed to feel differently than you do. You're not. You don't have to love difficulty to engage with it. You don't have to eliminate all resistance to move forward anyway. You just have to be willing to feel what you feel and act in alignment with your values regardless. That's not transcendence. That's maturity. Consider the way children learn to walk. They fall constantly.
Every attempt involves discomfort, uncertainty, and failure. Yet they keep trying.
Not because they've mastered some sophisticated philosophy about embracing difficulty, but because the pull toward growth is stronger than the fear of falling.
Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, many people lose this natural orientation toward challenge.
They learn to interpret discomfort as a signal to stop rather than a sign that they're learning. They develop elaborate justifications for why now isn't the right time, why this particular challenge isn't worth the effort, why they should wait until conditions are more favorable.
But conditions are never perfect.
There's never a moment when difficulty suddenly becomes easy. The only thing that changes is your willingness to engage with it despite the discomfort. And that willingness, that capacity to act in the presence of resistance, is what separates people who grow from people who stay stuck.
Your mind will always prefer the easy option when both are available. That preference won't disappear with more discipline or more motivation. It's baked into your biology. But what can change is your response to that preference. You can notice the pull toward comfort without automatically following it.
You can acknowledge the voice that says this is too hard without treating it as a command.
You can feel the resistance and choose the difficult thing anyway, not because you've overcome your humanity but because you understand that your momentary comfort and your long-term growth are often at odds. This understanding is where real change begins.
Not in the trying harder, not in the forcing yourself, but in the clear-eyed recognition of what's actually happening when you choose ease over effort.
You're not resting.
You're not being kind to yourself. You're trading away your future self-trust for a few moments of present relief. And once you see that trade clearly, once you understand what you're actually giving up, the choice becomes less automatic and more conscious. There's a particular moment that happens when you stand at the threshold of something difficult.
You can feel it in your body.
There's a hesitation, a pulling back, a last-ditch effort by your brain to redirect you towards something easier.
In that moment, you have a choice.
Not between comfortable and uncomfortable, because both options carry discomfort. The easy path carries the discomfort of self-disappointment, of diminished self-trust, of a shrinking sense of capability. The difficult path carries the discomfort of effort, of uncertainty, of not knowing if you'll succeed. Both are uncomfortable.
The question is which discomfort you're willing to live with. Most people don't frame the choice this way.
They see it as comfort versus discomfort, ease versus difficulty.
But that's not accurate.
It's immediate comfort versus delayed regret, or immediate discomfort versus delayed satisfaction. When you understand that avoiding difficulty doesn't actually avoid discomfort, it just changes when and how you experience it, the calculation shifts. The question becomes not whether you'll feel discomfort, but which kind of discomfort moves you toward the person you want to become.
The mind that runs from difficulty isn't broken. It's doing what it was designed to do.
Your task is not to fix it but to work with it, to understand its patterns, to recognize when its ancient programming is serving you and when it's holding you back. And then, in those moments when you feel the pull toward the easy path, to pause. To acknowledge what's happening. And to choose based not on what feels comfortable in this moment, but on who you're trying to become. This is not about becoming someone who never feels resistance or never wants to take the easy way.
It's about becoming someone who feels the resistance and acts anyway.
Someone who wants comfort but chooses growth. Someone who recognizes that the path to self-trust is paved with moments when you could have quit but didn't, when you could have avoided but engaged, when you could have waited but started. Those moments are where you build the evidence that you can rely on yourself. And that evidence, accumulated over time, becomes the foundation of an unshakable confidence that doesn't come from never facing difficulty, but from knowing you can handle it when you do. Let's examine more closely what happens in your neural landscape when you repeatedly avoid difficulty. Your brain is plastic, meaning it physically changes based on what you do and think. Every time you choose the easy path, you're not just making a one-time decision. You're sculpting the architecture of your brain. Neurons that fire together wire together, as neuroscientist Donald Hebb famously observed. When you consistently pair the feeling of discomfort with the action of avoidance, you create a superhighway in your brain connecting those two things. Eventually, the connection becomes so automatic that you avoid difficult things without even consciously deciding to do so. This neural patterning explains why breaking the cycle of avoidance feels so difficult at first.
You're not just fighting against a habit. You're rewiring deeply established neural pathways. The good news is that neuroplasticity works in both directions.
Just as your brain learned to avoid, it can learn to engage.
But this relearning requires repetition, consistency, and patience.
You can't expect years of avoidance patterning to reverse after a few days of effort. The brain needs time to build new pathways and strengthen them until they become the new default. There's also something important to understand about the stories you tell yourself around difficulty.
Most people have developed elaborate narratives that justify their avoidance.
You might tell yourself you work better under pressure, so you wait until the last minute.
You might say you're a perfectionist, so you can't start until you have all the information.
You might claim you're too tired, too busy, too stressed, too unprepared. These stories feel true because you've repeated them so many times. But they're not objective truths about who you are. They're explanations you've constructed to make sense of your avoidance pattern, and in doing so, you've turned a behavior into an identity. When avoidance becomes part of your identity, changing it feels threatening. If you believe you're someone who works better under pressure, then starting early feels like betraying yourself. If you believe you're a perfectionist, then taking imperfect action feels like abandoning your standards. These identity-level beliefs create resistance that operates beneath your conscious awareness. You think you're just not in the mood or not ready, but actually, you're protecting a version of yourself that you've invested in maintaining.
The way out of this trap is to separate behavior from identity. You're not someone who avoids difficulty.
You're someone who has developed a pattern of avoiding difficulty. That distinction might seem subtle, but it's profound.
A pattern is something you do. An identity is something you are. Patterns can change. They're not fixed features of your personality.
They're learned responses that made sense at some point, perhaps when you had fewer resources or different circumstances, but may no longer serve you now.
Think about the last time you successfully did something difficult. Maybe it was years ago, maybe it was yesterday.
In that moment, you proved that you're capable of engaging with challenge.
That capability didn't disappear. It's still there.
What changed is not your capacity but your willingness to access it.
And willingness is not a personality trait. It's a choice you make, moment by moment, situation by situation. You don't need to become a different person to choose differently.
You just need to recognize that the person you already are contains both the capacity to avoid and the capacity to engage.
Here's another dimension worth exploring.
When you avoid difficulty, you're often trying to avoid a specific feeling.
Maybe it's the feeling of inadequacy, of not being good enough, of potentially failing.
Maybe it's the feeling of overwhelm, of not knowing where to start, of the task being too big. Maybe it's the feeling of exposure, of others seeing your work and judging it.
These feelings are real and valid. But here's what many people don't realize: avoiding the task doesn't make the feeling go away.
It just postpones it and often amplifies it. When you put off a difficult conversation, the anxiety about that conversation doesn't disappear. It lingers in the background, coloring your other experiences, creating a low-level stress that affects everything else you do. When you avoid starting a project, the guilt and self-judgment don't vanish.
They accumulate. Every time you think about what you're not doing, you feel a little worse about yourself.
The avoidance that was supposed to protect you from discomfort actually creates a different, more persistent kind of discomfort.
It trades acute, time-limited discomfort for chronic, background discomfort.
This is why people often feel relief when they finally start the thing they've been avoiding.
It's not that the task suddenly became easy. It's that they've stopped carrying the weight of not doing it.
The anticipatory anxiety, the guilt, the self-criticism, the mental energy spent on justifying the avoidance, all of that lifts the moment you begin.
What remains is just the work itself, which is almost always more manageable than the story you've been telling yourself about it. Understanding this pattern gives you a powerful tool. When you feel the urge to avoid something difficult, you can ask yourself, am I actually avoiding discomfort, or am I just choosing a different kind of discomfort? Am I making things easier, or am I making them harder in a less obvious way?
This kind of honest self-inquiry cuts through the rationalizations and helps you see the choice more clearly. And when you see it clearly, you're more likely to make the choice that serves your growth rather than your temporary comfort. There's also a social dimension to how we relate to difficulty. We live in a culture that often celebrates ease and convenience. Marketing messages constantly promise that things can be easier, faster, simpler. There's an implicit suggestion that if something requires effort, there must be a better way. This cultural backdrop shapes your expectations about how life should feel. When you encounter difficulty, you might interpret it as evidence that something has gone wrong, that you're doing it wrong, or that there's an easier path you're missing. But many of the most worthwhile things in life are difficult. Building meaningful relationships requires difficult conversations. Developing expertise requires difficult practice. Creating something original requires difficult problem solving. Growing as a person requires difficult self-examination. The difficulty is not a bug in the system. It's a feature. It's the mechanism through which value is created, through which meaning is forged, through which you become more than you currently are. When you accept this, when you stop waiting for the path to get easier and instead focus on becoming someone who can handle difficulty, something shifts in your relationship with life itself. You stop feeling like you're constantly swimming against the current. You stop resenting the challenges that appear. You start to see them as invitations, as opportunities to prove to yourself once again that you can rise to meet what's required. This doesn't mean you seek out difficulty for its own sake or make things harder than they need to be. It means you stop treating difficulty as an aberration and start treating it as a normal, expected part of doing anything meaningful. Chapter 2: Difficulty and the Architecture of Identity. There's a moment that happens when you're in the middle of something hard. Your muscles are burning, or your mind is tired, or you're facing a problem you don't know how to solve. In that moment, you have a choice that goes far deeper than the task itself. You're not just deciding whether to continue or quit. You're deciding who you are. Most people don't think about it this way. They think character is something you're born with, a fixed trait like eye color or height. But character isn't what you have. It's what you build. And you build it in these moments, when continuing feels hard and quitting feels easy, when the outcome is uncertain and the effort is real. Every time you choose to stay in the difficulty rather than retreat from it, you're laying down another brick in the foundation of who you're becoming. This isn't metaphorical. It's not a nice idea or an inspirational thought. It's a description of an actual psychological process. Your sense of self, your identity, is not a static thing. It's constantly being updated based on the evidence you give yourself through your actions. When you do something difficult, you create a memory, a data point that says, I'm someone who can handle this. When you avoid something difficult, you create a different kind of memory, one that whispers, maybe I can't. Your brain collects these data points and uses them to predict what you're capable of in the future. Think of it like this. Imagine you're a scientist studying yourself. Every action you take is an experiment, generating data about your capabilities. If you consistently choose comfort over challenge, your internal scientist concludes, based on the available evidence, that you're someone who can't handle discomfort. This conclusion then influences future decisions. When new challenges appear, your brain references this database of past behavior and predicts you'll avoid those too. The prediction becomes self-fulfilling. Not because you're incapable, but because you've trained yourself to believe you are. The reverse is also true. When you consistently choose the difficult path, you're generating evidence of your capability. Your internal scientist looks at the data and concludes that you're someone who persists, who handles discomfort, who follows through. This conclusion shapes your future behavior in profound ways. You start to see yourself as capable, and this self-perception gives you access to resources you didn't know you had. You try things you would have avoided before. You persist longer than you thought you could. Not because you suddenly became stronger, but because your belief about what you're capable of changed based on the evidence you created.
This is how character is forged. Not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, though those matter too. Character is forged in the accumulation of small choices, repeated over time, until they become the pattern that defines you. You don't wake up one day with integrity. You build it by telling the truth when lying would be easier, by keeping your word when breaking it would be convenient, by doing what's right when no one is watching. Each small choice is a vote for the kind of person you want to be. And when you've cast enough votes in the same direction, that's who you become.
But here's where it gets interesting.
The relationship between difficulty and character isn't just about building capability. It's about building depth.
When you only do things that come easily, you remain on the surface of your own experience. You don't learn what you're made of because you never test yourself. You don't discover your limits because you never approach them. You don't develop resilience because you never need it. Life remains comfortable but somehow thin, lacking in texture and meaning. Difficulty forces you into a different relationship with yourself. It requires you to access parts of yourself you don't use in everyday comfort. You have to dig deeper, reach further, become more resourceful. In the process, you discover capacities you didn't know you had. You find that you can endure more than you thought, solve problems you assumed were beyond you, persist longer than seemed possible. These discoveries don't just make you more capable. They make you more real to yourself. You become someone who knows themselves through testing, through facing what's hard and learning what happens when you do. There's a concept in psychology called self-efficacy, which refers to your belief in your ability to succeed in specific situations. Research shows that self-efficacy is one of the strongest predictors of achievement and well-being. People with high self-efficacy attempt more difficult tasks, persist longer when facing obstacles, and recover faster from setbacks. But here's the crucial part: self-efficacy isn't built through affirmations or positive thinking. It's built through what psychologist Albert Bandura called mastery experiences, which means successfully handling difficult situations. Every time you face something hard and come through it, your self-efficacy increases. Every time you avoid difficulty, it decreases. This is why the relationship between difficulty and identity is so fundamental. You can't think your way into confidence. You can't imagine your way into capability. You have to earn it through action, through repeated engagement with things that challenge you. And the beautiful thing is that each success makes the next challenge more approachable. You develop a track record with yourself. You prove, again and again, that you can handle what's difficult. This evidence accumulates until it becomes the foundation of an identity that isn't fragile or dependent on external validation. It's solid because it's built on real experience, on things you've actually done. Now let's talk about discipline, because this is where many people get confused. They think discipline is about forcing yourself to do things, about willpower and grinding through misery. And while there's an element of self-control involved, that's not the full picture. Discipline, at its core, is about alignment. It's about acting in accordance with your values even when it's uncomfortable. It's about honoring commitments you've made to yourself when your feelings are pulling you in another direction. Motivation is different. Motivation is a feeling, an emotional state that makes action feel desirable. When you're motivated, doing the hard thing doesn't require much effort because you want to do it. The problem is that motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes based on mood, circumstances, recent events, how much sleep you got, what you ate for breakfast. If you wait for motivation before acting, you'll only act sporadically. You'll be productive when you feel good and stagnant when you don't. Your progress will be erratic, dependent on forces largely outside your control. Discipline is what bridges the gap between intention and action when motivation is absent. It's the capacity to do what you've decided to do regardless of how you feel in the moment. This doesn't mean ignoring your feelings or pushing through exhaustion. It means recognizing that feelings are not commands. They're information, data about your internal state, but they don't have to dictate your behavior. You can feel unmotivated and still act. You can feel resistant and still begin. You can feel uncertain and still take the next step. This distinction between motivation and discipline is crucial for understanding how character develops. If you rely on motivation, your character remains hostage to your emotional state.
You're only your best self when you feel like it. But if you develop discipline, you become someone who acts based on principles rather than preferences.
You do what matters regardless of whether it feels good.
And this consistency, this reliability, becomes part of your identity.
You become someone who follows through, who can be counted on, who doesn't need perfect conditions to act. The development of discipline happens through practice, and it starts small.
This is important to understand. You don't build discipline by attempting to overhaul your entire life overnight.
You build it by making and keeping small commitments to yourself.
You decide you'll make your bed every morning, and you do it. You decide you'll write for 15 minutes before checking your phone, and you do it. You decide you'll go for a walk even when you don't feel like it, and you do it. These actions might seem trivial, but they're not.
They're training exercises for your capacity to honor your word to yourself.
Each small commitment kept is like a deposit in your self-trust account. Over time, these deposits compound.
You begin to believe yourself when you say you'll do something. You begin to trust that the part of you that sets intentions and the part of you that takes action are actually working together rather than in conflict.
This internal coherence is what discipline feels like from the inside. It's not about rigid control or joyless compliance.
It's about knowing that you can rely on yourself, that your word to yourself means something. There's a particular power in small choices that most people underestimate. They think significant change requires significant action, that transformation happens through grand gestures and major decisions.
But the truth is more subtle. Your life is not shaped by the occasional big decision. It's shaped by the accumulation of small choices you make every single day.
The decision to get up when the alarm goes off or hit snooze. The decision to have the difficult conversation or avoid it.
The decision to do the work now or put it off.
Each choice, taken alone, seems almost meaningless. But taken together, over weeks and months and years, these choices become the architecture of your life.
This is why small difficult choices matter so much. They're not just about the immediate outcome.
They're about who you're becoming through the choosing. When you choose the difficult thing in a small moment, you're training yourself to choose difficulty. You're building the neural pathways, the habits of mind, the emotional capacity to engage with challenge. You're becoming someone for whom choosing the hard right over the easy wrong feels natural, not because it's easy but because it's aligned with who you've decided to be.
Consider the person who wakes up early to exercise. The exercise itself has benefits, certainly. But the real transformation is happening in the choice.
Every morning they wake up, feel the pull to stay in bed, and get up anyway. They're building something. They're proving to themselves that comfort isn't their highest value, that they're capable of discomfort in service of their goals, that their future self matters more than their present ease.
This evidence accumulates. After a month, they're not just someone who exercises.
They're someone who does hard things.
That's a different identity, and it affects everything else.
Or consider the person who keeps their workspace organized even when they're tired and it would be easier to leave it messy.
They're not just tidying up. They're practicing the discipline of completing things fully, of not leaving tasks half done, of maintaining standards even when no one is watching.
This practice carries over. When they face a difficult project at work, they have a reservoir of experience that says, "I'm someone who finishes things properly." That self-knowledge changes how they approach the challenge.
These examples might seem mundane, but that's the point. Character isn't built in the extraordinary moments. It's built in the ordinary ones. When you make the choice that no one sees, that doesn't seem to matter, that would be easy to skip. Those are the moments that matter most because they're the ones that reveal and reinforce your relationship with difficulty, with discipline, with yourself. The cumulative effect of small difficult choices is profound. You start to notice that things that used to feel overwhelming now feel manageable. Not because they got easier, but because you got stronger. Your capacity expanded through use.
You developed what researchers call stress inoculation, which means that exposure to manageable challenges makes you more resilient to future challenges.
Each difficulty you engage with prepares you for the next one.
Your threshold for what you can handle gradually rises. What once seemed impossible becomes merely difficult. What once seemed difficult becomes routine. Your sense of what you're capable of expands. This expansion isn't just psychological. It's neurological. Your brain physically changes based on what you do. When you repeatedly engage with difficulty, the regions of your brain associated with self-control, planning, and emotional regulation actually grow stronger and more efficient. You're not just building character in an abstract sense. You're literally rewiring your brain to be more capable of handling challenge. The difficulty you engage with today makes you neurologically better equipped for the difficulty you'll face tomorrow. Now let's explore how self-trust develops in this process, because this is perhaps the most important outcome of choosing difficulty. Self-trust is not confidence in the sense of believing you'll succeed at everything you attempt. It's something deeper. It's the knowledge that you'll show up for yourself, that you'll keep your commitments to yourself, that you won't abandon yourself when things get hard. It's the quiet certainty that whatever happens, you'll handle it. You can't build this kind of self-trust through external achievements alone. You can accomplish impressive things and still not trust yourself if those accomplishments came through circumstances rather than character. But when you know that you consistently choose the difficult path, when you have evidence that you don't quit when things get uncomfortable, when you've proven to yourself again and again that you can be relied upon, that knowledge becomes unshakable. It's not based on what you might do. It's based on what you have done, repeatedly, in circumstances where you could have chosen otherwise. This kind of self-trust changes everything. It affects how you approach new challenges because you're not wondering whether you'll follow through. You know you will because you have the evidence. It affects how you feel about yourself because your self-regard is based on real things you've done, not on potential or promise. It affects how others perceive you because self-trust radiates outward. People sense when someone has proven themselves to themselves. There's a solidity there, a groundedness that can't be faked. The process of building this self-trust is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with fanfare or recognition. It happens in moments when you're alone with your choice, when no one would know if you took the easy path, when the only person you're accountable to is yourself. Those are the moments that matter most. When you choose difficulty in those moments, when you honor your word to yourself even though no one is watching, you're building something that can't be taken away. You're building the foundation of an unshakable self. This is why the path of difficulty is also the path of freedom. It seems counterintuitive. You might think that choosing what's easy would lead to freedom, that avoiding discomfort would make you more free. But the opposite is true. When you consistently choose ease, you become trapped by your need for comfort. You can only do things that feel good. You can only go where it's comfortable. You can only attempt what's easy. Your options narrow. Your world gets smaller. You become dependent on circumstances being favorable because you haven't developed the capacity to act when they're not. But when you develop the ability to engage with difficulty, when you prove to yourself that discomfort won't break you, you become free in a much deeper sense. You're no longer limited by how you feel. You can pursue what matters to you regardless of whether the path is comfortable. You can take risks because you trust yourself to handle the difficulty that comes with them. You can grow because you're not confined to your current comfort zone. The world opens up because you're no longer afraid of what's hard. This freedom, this expansion of possibility that comes from facing difficulty, is perhaps the greatest gift you can give yourself. It's not just about what you accomplish, though you'll accomplish more. It's not just about how you feel, though you'll feel stronger. It's about who you become. Someone who knows themselves through testing. Someone who has proven their reliability to themselves. Someone who has built a character that can weather storms because it was forged in the choice to engage with difficulty rather than run from it. That's not who you are. That's who you're becoming, one difficult choice at a time. Chapter 3: What Mental Toughness Is, and What It Isn't. There's a popular image of mental toughness that gets repeated in gyms, in motivational content, in stories about people who pushed through pain to achieve something remarkable. It's the image of someone who doesn't feel, who doesn't break, who grits their teeth and powers through anything.
Someone impervious to discomfort, immune to doubt, unaffected by difficulty. This image is compelling. It's also deeply misleading. And if you try to build your mental strength based on this misunderstanding, you'll end up neither tough nor healthy. You'll end up brittle. Let's start by clearing away what mental toughness is not. It's not the absence of feeling. It's not emotional numbness or the ability to shut down your internal experience. It's not about pretending you don't hurt when you do, or acting like nothing bothers you when it does. That's not strength. That's suppression. And suppression, while it might look like toughness from the outside, actually makes you weaker over time. It disconnects you from vital information about your state, your limits, your needs. It creates a false version of strength that eventually collapses under its own weight. Think about the difference between a rigid piece of glass and a flexible piece of steel. The glass seems strong. It's hard, unyielding, resistant to pressure up to a point. But when that point is exceeded, it shatters completely. The steel bends under pressure. It flexes. It absorbs force rather than resisting it absolutely. And because it can bend, it doesn't break. Mental toughness is more like steel than glass. It's not about being so hard that nothing can affect you. It's about being flexible enough to absorb difficulty without breaking, to feel what you feel and continue anyway. This distinction between hardness and resilience is fundamental. Hardness is brittle. It creates an all-or-nothing dynamic where you're either holding it together perfectly or falling apart completely. Resilience is adaptive. It allows for temporary setbacks, for moments of struggle, for the natural fluctuation between strength and vulnerability that characterizes actual human experience. When you aim for hardness, you set yourself up for eventual failure because hardness can't be sustained. When you develop resilience, you build something that lasts because it's designed to flex with reality rather than deny it. The confusion between these two qualities causes real harm. You see it in people who pride themselves on never showing weakness, never asking for help, never admitting when they're struggling. They think they're being strong, but what they're actually doing is isolating themselves from support, from connection, from the resources they need to genuinely handle difficulty. They mistake invulnerability for strength when actual strength includes the courage to be vulnerable, to acknowledge when something is hard, to admit when you need assistance. Research in psychology consistently shows that emotional suppression, the practice of pushing down or hiding your feelings, leads to worse outcomes across almost every measure. It increases stress, impairs memory, damages relationships, and ironically makes the suppressed emotions more intense and harder to manage over time. The feelings don't go away because you ignore them. They accumulate, creating pressure that eventually finds a way out, often in ways you didn't choose and can't control. This is not what mental toughness looks like. This is what happens when you confuse toughness with denial. Real mental toughness includes emotional awareness. It means knowing what you feel, acknowledging it, and then choosing your response based on what serves you rather than what the emotion demands. This is a crucial distinction. You can feel afraid and still act courageously. You can feel discouraged and still persist. You can feel overwhelmed and still take the next step. The feeling and the action are separate. Mental toughness is not about controlling your feelings. It's about not letting your feelings control your actions. Consider an athlete in the middle of a difficult competition. If they're mentally tough in the brittle sense, they try to shut down any awareness of pain, fatigue, or doubt. They tell themselves these things don't exist, that they're fine, that they can keep going indefinitely. This approach works until it doesn't. Eventually, the body's signals become too loud to ignore, or the suppressed doubt resurfaces at a critical moment, or the accumulated fatigue causes a breakdown. The athlete who seemed invincible suddenly can't continue. Now consider an athlete who's mentally tough in the resilient sense. They feel the pain. They acknowledge the fatigue. They notice the doubt. But they also have the capacity to feel these things without being controlled by them. They can assess whether the pain indicates injury or just effort, whether the fatigue means they need to adjust their pace or if they can push through, whether the doubt is useful information or just noise.
They make decisions based on a full picture of their experience rather than a censored version of it. This athlete has access to more information and therefore makes better choices.
They're not pretending to be superhuman.
They're working skillfully with the reality of being human.
This brings us to a more accurate definition of mental toughness.
Mental toughness is the capacity to maintain effective action in the presence of discomfort, uncertainty, and setback.
Read that again. It's not the absence of discomfort. It's action in the presence of discomfort. It's not the elimination of uncertainty. It's functioning effectively despite uncertainty. It's not avoiding setbacks. It's continuing after setbacks occur.
The difficulty is assumed.
The discomfort is expected.
Mental toughness is about what you do when those things are present, not about making them disappear. This definition changes everything about how you develop mental strength. If you think toughness means not feeling, you'll spend your energy trying to numb yourself, to build walls around your experience, to pretend you're unaffected by what affects you.
This is exhausting and ultimately ineffective.
But if you understand that toughness means acting effectively while feeling whatever you feel, you can spend your energy on developing skills that actually matter. Skills like emotional regulation, perspective taking, distress tolerance, and committed action. These are learnable capacities, not fixed traits.
You can get better at them through practice. Emotional regulation doesn't mean eliminating emotions.
It means managing their intensity and duration so they don't overwhelm your capacity to function.
When you feel anger, you don't have to act on it immediately.
You can feel it, acknowledge it, and choose whether and how to express it.
When you feel fear, you don't have to let it stop you.
You can feel it, understand what it's telling you, and decide whether it's providing useful information or just triggering an outdated alarm system. This ability to have feelings without being had by them is a core component of mental toughness. Perspective taking is the capacity to zoom out from your immediate experience and see it in a larger context. When you're in the middle of something difficult, it can feel like it will last forever, like you can't handle it, like it's the most important thing in the world. Perspective allows you to remember that feelings are temporary, that you've handled difficult things before, that this moment is not your entire life. This doesn't make the difficulty disappear, but it makes it more manageable.
You can endure something for 5 more minutes that you couldn't endure forever. Perspective gives you that 5-minute framework instead of the forever framework.
Distress tolerance is exactly what it sounds like, your capacity to tolerate distressing emotions and sensations without trying to escape them or fix them immediately.
This is a trainable skill.
Every time you stay present with discomfort rather than distracting yourself or numbing out, you're increasing your distress tolerance. Every time you feel anxiety and continue with what you're doing rather than stopping to manage the anxiety, you're teaching your nervous system that the feeling isn't dangerous. Over time, your window of tolerance expands. You can handle more intensity, for longer periods, without becoming dysregulated. Committed action means doing what matters to you even when it's difficult, even when you don't feel like it, even when you're not sure it will work.
It's the behavioral expression of mental toughness.
It's not about forcing yourself through misery. It's about aligning your actions with your values regardless of your momentary emotional state. You care about your health, so you exercise even when you don't feel motivated. You value your relationships, so you have difficult conversations even when they're uncomfortable. You're committed to your growth, so you engage with challenges even when you'd rather avoid them. This consistency between what you value and what you do, maintained across varying emotional states, is what mental toughness looks like in practice. Now, there's another crucial aspect of mental toughness that often gets overlooked: the capacity for long-term thinking. This is what separates people who can persist through extended difficulty from those who burn out quickly. Short-term thinking optimizes for immediate relief. Long-term thinking optimizes for eventual outcomes. And the ability to maintain a long-term perspective when your emotions are screaming for immediate relief is a form of mental strength that determines success in almost every meaningful domain. Your brain is wired for short-term thinking. This served your ancestors well when threats were immediate and consequences were quick. But in the modern world, most of what matters requires sustained effort over extended periods.
Building a career takes years. Developing expertise takes thousands of hours. Creating meaningful relationships requires consistent investment.
Improving your health demands daily choices that accumulate over time. None of these things yield immediate gratification. They require the capacity to choose delayed benefits over immediate comfort, again and again, for longer than feels natural.
This capacity for delayed gratification is not about willpower in the traditional sense.
It's about how vividly you can imagine your future self and how much you care about that person. Research shows that people who have a strong connection to their future self make better long-term decisions. They save more money, take better care of their health, and invest more in their development.
They're not more disciplined in some abstract sense.
They just recognize that their future self is still them, deserving of the same consideration they give their present self.
The problem is that your future self feels abstract. Your present discomfort feels concrete.
When you're tired and your bed is comfortable and your alarm is going off, the future benefits of waking up early feel distant and uncertain. The immediate comfort of staying in bed feels real and available. Your brain, optimizing for the immediate, pulls you toward the bed. Mental toughness, in this context, is the ability to make the future feel real enough to compete with the present. To imagine yourself at the end of the day, either satisfied because you did what you intended or disappointed because you didn't. To care about that future feeling as much as you care about your present comfort.
This is a learnable skill.
You can practice bringing your future self into focus, making that person real to you, considering their needs and desires with the same weight you give your present needs and desires. You can ask yourself, when facing a difficult choice, what will my future self wish I had done? This question cuts through the immediate emotional pull and connects you to a longer time frame. It doesn't eliminate the difficulty of the present choice, but it contextualizes it.
The discomfort you're facing now is temporary.
The consequences of your choice will last longer. Mental toughness is choosing based on the lasting consequence rather than the temporary discomfort. There's also something important to understand about how mental toughness develops over time.
It's not linear. You don't get steadily tougher day by day in a smooth upward trajectory.
You develop it in waves, through cycles of stress and recovery, challenge and rest.
This is where many people misunderstand the process. They think being mentally tough means never needing rest, never backing off, always pushing.
This approach doesn't create resilience.
It creates burnout.
Think about how physical strength develops.
You stress a muscle through resistance training.
This stress actually damages the muscle fibers slightly. Then, during rest, the muscle repairs itself and comes back stronger. The growth happens in the recovery, not just in the training.
Mental toughness works the same way.
You need to engage with difficulty to build capacity. But you also need recovery periods where you're not constantly pushing, where you can integrate what you've learned, where your nervous system can recalibrate. The cycle of stress and recovery is what creates adaptation.
If you're always stressed, you never adapt. You just accumulate damage.
This is why sustainable mental toughness includes wisdom about when to push and when to rest. It's not about being able to endure anything indefinitely. It's about knowing your capacity, respecting it, and working at the edge of it rather than constantly beyond it. You want to challenge yourself enough to grow but not so much that you break. This requires honest self-assessment, the ability to distinguish between productive discomfort and destructive stress, between the feeling of growth and the feeling of harm. Productive discomfort is characterized by a sense of challenge within your capacity to meet it. You're stretched but not overwhelmed.
You're uncomfortable but not unable to function.
There's a quality of engagement, of being fully present with the difficulty.
Destructive stress, on the other hand, feels overwhelming. It exceeds your capacity to cope. It leads to withdrawal rather than engagement, to survival mode rather than growth mode.
Learning to recognize this difference in your own experience is crucial for developing mental toughness sustainably.
One of the most powerful aspects of mental toughness is that it's transferable.
When you develop resilience in one area of your life, you don't just become tougher in that specific domain.
You become tougher in general.
The person who learns to persist through difficult workouts develops a capacity for persistence that shows up in their work, their relationships, their personal projects. The person who learns to manage anxiety in social situations develops emotional regulation skills that help them manage stress at work. The mental muscles you build in one context strengthen your capacity across all contexts. This transferability means that every difficult thing you engage with, regardless of the specific domain, contributes to your overall mental strength. You're not just learning to handle that particular challenge. You're learning how to handle difficulty itself. You're proving to yourself that you can feel discomfort and continue, that you can face uncertainty and still act, that you can encounter setbacks and still persist. These lessons generalize. They become part of how you approach life, not just isolated skills for specific situations. But there's a shadow side to this that's worth acknowledging. Sometimes people develop a kind of mental toughness that's actually just tolerance for mistreatment. They learn to endure situations that shouldn't be endured, to persist in circumstances that should be changed or left.
This is not the mental toughness we're discussing.
Real mental strength includes the wisdom to know when persistence is serving you and when it's harming you, when staying is brave and when leaving would be braver.
Mental toughness is not about becoming someone who can tolerate anything.
It's about becoming someone who can handle the difficulty that comes with pursuing what matters to you, with maintaining your values under pressure, with doing what's right even when it's hard. It's in service of your growth and your values, not in service of enduring whatever circumstances you find yourself in.
Sometimes the mentally tough choice is to persist. Sometimes it's to walk away.
The key is that the choice is yours, based on clear thinking and self-knowledge, not driven by fear or habit or what you think you're supposed to do.
There's also an interpersonal dimension to mental toughness that often gets missed.
People sometimes think that being mentally tough means being independent to the point of isolation, never needing anyone, handling everything alone.
This is another misunderstanding.
Real strength includes the capacity to ask for help, to admit when you're struggling, to accept support when it's offered.
These things don't make you weak. They make you realistic about what it means to be human. No one is strong in every moment. No one handles everything perfectly. No one is immune to struggle.
The people who seem the most mentally tough are often the ones who have built strong support systems, who know when to lean on others, who aren't trying to prove their invulnerability. They're tough enough to be honest about their limitations, secure enough to acknowledge when they need help, wise enough to recognize that accepting support is not the same as being helpless.
The development of mental toughness is ultimately about becoming more fully yourself.
Not a hardened, emotionless version of yourself.
Not an invulnerable, perfect version of yourself.
Just a version that can handle more, that bends without breaking, that feels everything and continues anyway. A version that knows the difference between difficulty that makes you grow and difficulty that makes you smaller. A version that can persist when persistence serves you and change course when it doesn't. A version that's strong enough to be soft, tough enough to be tender, resilient enough to be real. This kind of mental toughness is built through the accumulation of experiences where you stayed present with difficulty rather than numbing out, where you acknowledged your feelings rather than suppressing them, where you acted in alignment with your values rather than your momentary comfort. It's built through the practice of long-term thinking, of caring about your future self enough to make hard choices now. It's built through cycles of stress and recovery, through knowing when to push and when to rest, through learning from both your successes and your failures.
You don't become mentally tough by pretending difficulty doesn't affect you.
You become mentally tough by allowing it to affect you and discovering that you can handle being affected.
You don't become resilient by avoiding pain.
You become resilient by moving through pain and coming out the other side with the knowledge that pain is temporary and you are capable.
You don't develop strength by denying your humanity.
You develop strength by fully inhabiting it, with all its vulnerability and limitation, and choosing to act courageously anyway.
This is the mental toughness worth developing.
Not the brittle kind that looks impressive until it shatters.
Not the hard kind that protects you by cutting you off from life.
But the flexible kind that bends with difficulty and returns to center. The aware kind that feels everything and acts wisely. The sustainable kind that grows stronger over time because it's built on reality rather than denial.
This is the mental toughness that lasts, that serves you, that makes you not just stronger but more whole. Chapter 4: The Habit of Choosing the Hard Thing.
There's a moment that arrives quietly, without fanfare or warning. It's the moment when you stand before two paths, and you know, without needing to think about it, which one is easier. The easier path doesn't announce itself with neon signs or promises. It simply feels more comfortable, more familiar, more like the version of yourself you've always been.
The harder path, by contrast, carries a weight.
Not the weight of impossibility, but the weight of discomfort.
And in that moment, the choice you make isn't just about what you do next. It's about who you're becoming. Choosing the hard thing isn't a dramatic act of heroism.
It's not about gritting your teeth and forcing yourself through impossible challenges.
It's quieter than that.
It's about developing a relationship with discomfort that most people never establish. It's about learning to sit with the tension, the doubt, the mild irritation of doing what doesn't feel natural, and recognizing that this tension is not your enemy. It's your training ground.
You see, most of what we call weakness isn't actually weakness at all. It's the absence of practice. You haven't practiced staying when everything in you wants to leave.
You haven't practiced beginning when the task feels too large or too tedious. You haven't practiced continuing when the initial excitement has faded and all that's left is the work itself. And because you haven't practiced, the hard thing remains hard. But here's what changes everything: hardness is not a fixed quality. It's a perception that shifts as you build capacity. The habit of choosing the hard thing begins with something so small it barely registers. It begins with noticing.
Noticing the internal negotiation that happens in the seconds before you act.
Noticing the voice that says, maybe later, or this doesn't really matter, or I'll start tomorrow when I'm more ready.
This voice isn't malicious. It's protective.
It wants to keep you comfortable, to keep you safe from failure, from judgment, from the vulnerability of trying. But comfort, when chosen repeatedly, becomes a cage.
And the door is always unlocked from the inside. Let's talk about what it actually means to stay with discomfort.
Because there's a common misunderstanding here.
Staying with discomfort doesn't mean suffering. It doesn't mean punishing yourself or pushing until something breaks.
It means developing the ability to remain present when your mind is pulling you toward escape. Think of it like this: discomfort is a sensation, not a command. When you feel it, your nervous system interprets it as a signal that something is wrong, that you should move away, that you should seek relief.
But not all discomfort indicates danger. Some discomfort indicates growth. When you choose to exercise instead of scrolling through your phone, there's discomfort.
When you choose to have a difficult conversation instead of letting resentment build, there's discomfort. When you choose to work on a project that matters instead of distracting yourself with trivial tasks, there's discomfort. This is not the discomfort of harm.
This is the discomfort of expansion.
Your system hasn't adjusted to this version of you yet. It's still calibrated to the old patterns, the old limits.
And so it resists. Not because you're failing, but because you're changing. The skill you're building is the ability to feel that resistance and continue anyway.
Not with aggression, not with shame, but with a quiet acknowledgement: I feel this, and I'm doing it anyway.
This is not suppression. You're not pretending the discomfort isn't there. You're recognizing it as information, not instruction.
You're learning that you can coexist with discomfort without needing to obey it.
Here's where most people stumble. They believe that once they've made the decision to choose the hard thing, the battle is over. But the decision is only the beginning.
The real work happens in the moments of resistance that follow.
These are the moments when your mind offers you a way out. It's subtle. It doesn't usually say, give up. Instead, it negotiates. It says, you've already done so much today. You can skip this once. It says, you're tired. You'll do better tomorrow. It says, this particular instance doesn't really matter in the long run.
These are internal bargains, and they're convincing because they contain a sliver of truth.
You are tired. You have done a lot. One instance might not matter. But here's what your mind doesn't tell you: it's not about this one instance. It's about the pattern you're reinforcing.
Every time you negotiate yourself out of discomfort, you're training yourself to retreat. Every time you follow through despite the negotiation, you're training yourself to advance.
The choice compounds. This is why awareness is your first tool.
You need to catch the negotiation as it's happening.
Not after you've already given in. Not when you're reflecting on why you didn't follow through. In the moment. When the voice starts offering you an exit, you need to recognize it for what it is: a test.
Not a test from some external force, but a test of your own resolve.
And the beautiful thing about tests like this is that you get to take them over and over until you pass. So you start small. Ridiculously small. You don't begin by overhauling your entire life.
You begin by identifying one area, one repeating moment where you consistently choose the easier path.
Maybe it's hitting the snooze button. Maybe it's skipping a workout. Maybe it's avoiding a phone call you know you need to make. You identify the moment, and you decide, in advance, what you'll do differently. This is crucial: you decide in advance. Because in the moment, your mind is optimized for comfort, not growth. In the moment, the negotiation is happening in real time, and you're at a disadvantage. But when you've already decided, when you've committed before the discomfort arrives, you're not making a choice in the heat of the moment. You're simply following through on a decision you've already made. This removes the emotional weight. It becomes mechanical.
Not in a soulless way, but in a reliable way.
You wake up, and the alarm goes off.
The negotiation begins immediately.
Your body is warm under the covers. The room is cold. You're tired. All of this is true. But you've already decided. You're not debating whether to get up. You're just getting up.
The discomfort is there, yes.
You feel it. But you're not waiting for it to go away before you act. You're acting alongside it.
And here's what starts to happen: slowly, imperceptibly at first, the discomfort begins to lose its power. Not because it disappears, but because you've proven to yourself that you can function within it. You've demonstrated, through repeated action, that discomfort is not a barrier.
It's just a condition.
And you can operate under all kinds of conditions.
This is where the habit starts to form.
Not in the singular act of choosing the hard thing once, but in the accumulation of small, consistent choices.
Each time you follow through, you're laying down a neural pathway. You're teaching your brain that this is what you do now. You're not someone who waits until they feel like it.
You're someone who acts regardless of how you feel.
And that identity shift is everything. Because here's the truth that most people don't realize until much later: motivation is not a prerequisite for action. It's a result of action. You don't wait to feel motivated. You act, and the motivation follows. Or it doesn't. And you act anyway. This is what separates those who build lasting change from those who remain trapped in cycles of intention without execution. The ones who succeed have learned to decouple action from emotion. They've learned that they don't need to feel a certain way to do what needs to be done.
Now, let's go deeper into the mechanics of resistance.
Because resistance is not just a feeling.
It's a sophisticated internal system designed to protect you from perceived threat. And in most cases, the threat isn't real.
It's imagined.
But your nervous system doesn't know the difference. When you're about to do something difficult, especially something unfamiliar, your brain scans for danger.
It asks, is this safe? Have we done this before? What's the worst that could happen?
And if the answers are uncertain, it triggers a stress response. Your heart rate might increase slightly.
You might feel a tightness in your chest. You might feel a strong pull toward distraction. This is not a character flaw. This is biology.
Your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do.
But you are not your brain. You are the one observing the brain's activity.
And from that place of observation, you have a choice. You can identify with the resistance, or you can notice it without becoming it.
You can say, I see that my mind is generating discomfort right now. That's interesting. And I'm going to do this anyway.
This practice of noticing without obeying is the foundation of mental resilience. It's the ability to create space between stimulus and response,
between the feeling and the action. In that space, you reclaim your agency.
You're no longer a passive recipient of your impulses.
You're an active participant in your own life. Let me give you an example. You've committed to writing every morning. You sit down at your desk. You open your laptop.
And immediately, your mind floods with objections.
I don't know what to write. I'm not inspired. I should check my email first. Maybe I need more coffee.
Maybe I should research a bit more before I start. These thoughts arrive so quickly, so convincingly, that most people mistake them for legitimate obstacles.
But they're not obstacles. They're resistance. And resistance always sounds reasonable.
So instead of obeying the thoughts, you notice them.
My mind is telling me I'm not ready. That's what minds do. And then you write anyway. Not because the thoughts have gone away. Not because you've suddenly found inspiration. But because you've decided that you write in the morning, and it's morning, so you write. The quality doesn't matter yet. The feeling doesn't matter yet. What matters is that you're honoring your commitment to yourself.
And this is where trust begins to build. Every time you keep a commitment to yourself, especially when it's difficult, you're depositing into an internal account. You're proving to yourself that you are someone who does what they say they'll do. And over time, that self-trust becomes the foundation of your confidence.
Not confidence that you'll always feel good. Not confidence that things will be easy.
But confidence that you can rely on yourself, even when things are hard. This is the deeper purpose of choosing the hard thing.
It's not really about the specific action.
It's about who you're becoming through the repetition of that action. You're becoming someone who doesn't collapse at the first sign of difficulty.
You're becoming someone who doesn't need perfect conditions to move forward. You're becoming someone who has internalized the understanding that discomfort is not only tolerable, it's valuable.
Now, as this habit deepens, something interesting happens.
The hard thing starts to become automatic.
Not in the sense that it becomes easy or comfortable, but in the sense that it becomes your default.
You don't have to summon willpower every single time. You don't have to give yourself a pep talk.
You just do it, the same way you brush your teeth or put on your seatbelt.
It's integrated into your identity. But let me be clear, this doesn't happen overnight.
And it doesn't happen through sheer force.
It happens through consistency. Through showing up, again and again, even when the results aren't visible yet.
Even when you're not sure it's working. Even when the old patterns are still whispering in your ear, telling you to go back to what's familiar. There will be days when you stumble.
Days when the negotiation wins. And on those days, you have another choice to make.
You can interpret the stumble as evidence that you're not cut out for this, that change is impossible, that you're destined to stay the same.
Or you can interpret it as data. As feedback. As a single moment in a much longer process. And then you return. Not with shame. Not with self-punishment.
But with the same quiet resolve that brought you here in the first place.
Because the habit of choosing the hard thing isn't about perfection. It's about direction.
It's about orienting yourself, day after day, toward the version of yourself you're becoming. And every time you choose discomfort over ease, every time you act despite the resistance, you're casting a vote for that future self.
You're saying, this is who I am now. And gradually, imperceptibly, it becomes true. The gap between who you are and who you want to be starts to close.
Not because you've arrived at some final destination, but because you've learned to walk the path. You've learned that the path is made of small steps, repeated over time. And you've learned that you're capable of taking those steps even when they're hard.
Especially when they're hard. Let's explore what happens in your brain when you make these choices repeatedly.
There's a part of your nervous system called the reticular activating system. It's a network of neurons that filters information and determines what gets your attention.
When you consistently choose the hard thing, you're essentially reprogramming this system.
You're teaching it that difficulty is not a signal to avoid, but a signal to engage. Your brain starts to recognize patterns of behavior that lead to growth, and it begins to make those patterns more accessible.
This is why the first few weeks of any new habit feels so difficult.
Your brain hasn't created efficient pathways for this behavior yet. Every time you do it, you're forging new neural connections. It's like walking through an overgrown forest for the first time. There's no clear path, so you have to push through branches and step over roots.
But each time you walk that same route, the path becomes a little clearer. Eventually, it becomes a trail. Then a road. And then you can walk it without thinking.
But here's what most people don't understand about this process: the difficulty never completely goes away. Even when the behavior becomes automatic, there will still be moments when the old resistance surfaces. There will still be days when your mind offers you the exit. The difference is that you've built the capacity to move through that resistance quickly. You don't get stuck in the negotiation anymore. You recognize it, acknowledge it, and continue.
The resistance becomes background noise instead of a roadblock. This is mental resilience in its purest form. It's not the absence of difficulty. It's the presence of capacity.
You've trained yourself to operate effectively despite internal friction. And that capacity extends far beyond the specific habit you've been practicing. When you learn to choose the hard thing in one area of your life, you develop a transferable skill.
You learn that you can apply the same process to any challenge. The domain changes, but the mechanism remains the same. Notice the resistance, decide in advance, act despite discomfort, repeat until automatic. Consider what this means for your life as a whole. Most people live within a narrow range of comfort. They avoid conversations that might be awkward. They avoid projects that might fail. They avoid experiences that might be uncomfortable. And in doing so, they create a smaller and smaller world for themselves. Not consciously. Not intentionally.
But the cumulative effect of thousands of small avoidances is a life that feels constrained, limited, less than what it could be.
When you develop the habit of choosing the hard thing, you're doing the opposite. You're expanding your range.
You're deliberately stepping into spaces that feel uncertain. And each time you do this, your comfort zone doesn't just expand.
It transforms.
What once felt impossible becomes merely difficult.
What once felt difficult becomes manageable. What once felt manageable becomes routine. And then you're ready for the next level of challenge. This is how people accomplish things that seem extraordinary to others. They're not fundamentally different.
They haven't been blessed with superhuman willpower.
They've simply practiced choosing the hard thing enough times that their baseline has shifted. What looks like exceptional discipline to an outside observer is simply their normal operating mode. They've made the hard thing automatic. But let's address something important here.
There's a difference between choosing the hard thing and choosing the harmful thing.
Discomfort that leads to growth has a specific quality. It stretches you, but it doesn't break you. It challenges you, but it doesn't destroy you.
There's a kind of clarity in growth-oriented discomfort. You can sense that you're building something, even if you can't articulate exactly what it is yet. Harmful discomfort, on the other hand, feels different. It's the discomfort of ignoring your genuine needs. It's the discomfort of pushing past your body's legitimate signals. It's the discomfort of trying to prove something to someone who doesn't matter. Learning to distinguish between these two types of discomfort is crucial. And this distinction comes through paying attention to the quality of your experience, not just the presence of difficulty. When you're choosing the hard thing in a healthy way, there's a sense of alignment underneath the discomfort. You might not enjoy the process, but somewhere deep down, you know you're moving in the right direction. You feel the resistance, but you also feel a quiet rightness about what you're doing.
That's your internal compass.
That's what tells you this difficulty is worth it. When you're choosing the hard thing in an unhealthy way, there's a sense of discord underneath the discomfort. You're pushing, but it feels like you're pushing against yourself rather than challenging yourself. There's a quality of force that doesn't sit right.
Pay attention to that.
Your body knows the difference between expansion and violence, even when your mind tries to justify the latter as discipline. So as you build this habit, maintain a relationship with your own internal wisdom.
Check in with yourself regularly. Ask, is this discomfort in service of my growth, or is it in service of an old story I'm trying to prove? The answer might not always be clear, but the question itself is valuable. It keeps you honest.
It keeps you connected to the deeper purpose behind your actions.
Now let's talk about what happens when this habit becomes integrated into your identity.
There's a shift that occurs, and it's profound. You stop seeing yourself as someone who struggles with discipline. You stop identifying with the version of yourself who always took the easy path. Instead, you begin to see yourself as someone who does hard things.
Not because you're special, but because that's simply who you are now. This identity shift is more powerful than any technique or strategy.
When you genuinely believe I am someone who shows up, you don't need to convince yourself to show up each time.
It's not a negotiation anymore. It's just what you do.
When you genuinely believe I am someone who follows through, you don't need to manufacture motivation.
Following through is simply how you operate in the world.
But here's the subtle trap that comes with this identity shift. You might start to believe that you're supposed to enjoy the hard thing. You might think that once you've developed the habit, the discomfort should disappear entirely.
And when it doesn't, you might interpret that as failure. This is a misunderstanding. The discomfort doesn't disappear. Your relationship with it changes. You become comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's different from the discomfort itself going away.
In fact, if you find that what once felt hard now feels easy, that's not the end point.
That's a signal that it's time to find the next edge. Because growth doesn't happen in the zone of ease.
It happens in the zone of challenge. And as you build capacity, your edge moves.
What challenged you 6 months ago might be your warm-up now. And that's exactly as it should be.
You're not trying to arrive at a place where nothing is hard anymore. You're trying to become someone who can handle increasingly difficult things.
This is the true gift of this practice. You're not just building a habit.
You're building a relationship with your own potential. You're discovering that you're capable of more than you believed. Not in a vague, inspirational sense, but in a concrete, experiential sense.
You've proven it to yourself through action. And that proof is what creates unshakable confidence. So the question isn't whether the hard thing is available to you. It's always available. The question is whether you're willing to choose it.
Whether you're willing to sit with the discomfort, to notice the negotiation, to act anyway. Whether you're willing to build the habit, one choice at a time, until choosing the hard thing becomes as natural as breathing.
You are. You've always been capable of this. You're just learning to trust that capability.
And with each choice, that trust deepens. With each choice, you become more of who you truly are.
Not the person who waits for the right moment, but the person who creates the moment by choosing to act. This is your work now. To notice. To choose. To act. To return when you stumble. To trust the process even when you can't see the results yet.
And to understand, deeply, that every moment of discomfort you choose is a moment of growth.
Every moment you could have retreated but didn't is a moment you expanded.
The hard thing is not your burden.
It's your practice.
And through that practice, you're building something unshakable, the confidence that comes from knowing you can rely on yourself, no matter what.
That's not motivational rhetoric. That's the truth you discover by living it. One choice at a time. One moment of resistance honored. One negotiation noticed and transcended. This is how you become the person you're meant to be.
Not through force, not through perfection, but through the quiet, consistent practice of choosing the hard thing. Chapter 5: Strong Mind, Calm Presence. There's a quality that exists in people who consistently do hard things.
It's not loud. It's not visible from the outside in any obvious way. But if you pay attention, you can sense it.
It's in the way they move through challenges without drama. It's in the way they face setbacks without spiraling. It's in the way they carry themselves when no one is watching.
This quality isn't confidence in the conventional sense. It's something quieter, something deeper.
It's a kind of internal stability that doesn't require external validation to exist.
This is what happens when you've spent enough time choosing the hard thing. You develop an inner voice that's fundamentally different from the one most people live with. Most people have an inner voice that questions, doubts, negotiates, and undermines. It's the voice that says, "Are you sure you can do this? What if you fail? What will people think?" It's not necessarily cruel, but it's not supportive either. It's anxious. It's uncertain. And it shapes how you move through the world.
But when you've practiced choosing difficulty, when you've honored your commitments to yourself over and over, your inner voice changes.
It becomes steadier. It becomes more factual. Instead of asking, "Can I do this?" it says, "I've done hard things before. I'll figure this out."
Instead of catastrophizing about failure, it acknowledges, "This might not work, and that's okay.
I'll learn and adjust." Instead of seeking reassurance from others, it provides its own grounding.
This shift is subtle, but its impact is everything.
Let's talk about what this inner voice actually sounds like. It's not grandiose. It doesn't tell you that you're special or superior or destined for greatness. It's not trying to pump you up or convince you of anything. Instead, it's remarkably simple. It sounds like this: "I can handle this." Not "This will be easy." Not "I'll definitely succeed." Just "I can handle this."
And that simple statement, backed by evidence from your own experience, is more powerful than any external motivation could ever be.
You see, external motivation is inherently fragile. It depends on circumstances, on other people, on feelings that come and go.
When you rely on external motivation, you're at the mercy of your environment.
You need the right playlist. You need someone to encourage you. You need to feel inspired. And when those things aren't available, you're stuck. You don't act. You wait. You tell yourself you'll do it when the conditions are better, when you feel more ready, when the stars align. But people with a strong mind and calm presence don't operate this way. They've learned something fundamental: motivation is optional. It's nice when it shows up, certainly. It can make things more pleasant. But it's not required.
What's required is the decision to act and the follow-through on that decision.
Everything else is decoration. This is one of the most liberating realizations you can have. You don't need to feel like doing something to do it. You don't need to be inspired to begin.
You don't need perfect conditions or optimal energy levels or the right mood. You simply need to have decided, in advance, what you're going to do, and then you do it.
The feelings come or they don't.
The inspiration arrives or it doesn't. But you act regardless, because you've built an internal system that operates independently of external circumstances.
Think about what this means for your life. Most people are constantly scanning their environment for reasons to act or not act. They're asking, "Do I feel like it? Is this a good time? What will happen if I do this? What will people think?" And because they're asking these questions, they're perpetually in a state of evaluation. They're judging the moment, judging themselves, judging the task.
And all that judgment creates friction.
It creates hesitation. It creates the gap between intention and action.
When you've developed this internal stability, you're not scanning for reasons anymore. You're not evaluating whether now is the right time. You've already decided what needs to be done, and the question of when has been answered: now. There's no gap between the thought and the action because you've removed the layer of judgment that usually sits between them.
This doesn't mean you act impulsively or recklessly.
It means you act deliberately, without the endless internal debate that exhausts most people before they even begin.
Let me be specific about how this develops. It doesn't come from a single revelation or insight. It comes from accumulation.
Every time you do the hard thing when you don't feel like it, you're contributing to this internal stability. Every time you keep a commitment to yourself despite resistance, you're proving something to yourself. Not in words, not in theory, but in lived experience.
You're demonstrating that your feelings don't control your actions.
You're demonstrating that you can be reliable to yourself regardless of circumstance.
And over time, this accumulation builds into something solid.
It's like you've been stacking stones, one on top of another, and suddenly you realize you've built a foundation.
You didn't notice it happening in any single moment, but now it's there. And this foundation changes everything.
It changes how you approach challenges. It changes how you respond to setbacks.
It changes how you think about yourself.
People who haven't built this foundation are constantly trying to manufacture confidence.
They read books.
They listen to speeches.
They repeat affirmations. And these things can be helpful, certainly. But they're external. They're borrowed. They're not rooted in your own experience. And because they're not rooted, they don't hold up under pressure.
When things get difficult, when the initial excitement fades, when no one is watching, the borrowed confidence disappears. And you're left wondering why you can't seem to maintain momentum.
But the confidence that comes from doing hard things is different. It's not borrowed. It's earned. It's not based on belief. It's based on evidence.
You're not telling yourself you're capable and hoping you'll believe it. You're reminding yourself of what you've already done, and recognizing that if you could do that, you can do this. This is confidence in the truest sense, a realistic assessment of your own capacity based on your track record. And here's what's interesting about this kind of confidence: it's quiet.
It doesn't need to announce itself.
It doesn't need to be seen or validated by others.
In fact, it often goes unnoticed precisely because it's so steady. There's no performance to it. No bravado. No need to convince anyone, including yourself, that you're capable. You simply know, in the same way you know you can walk or breathe. It's not something you think about. It's something you embody. This is why people with real confidence often seem understated.
They're not trying to project strength.
They're not managing their image.
They're just moving through their life with a kind of ease that comes from knowing they can handle what comes.
And this ease isn't about things being easy.
It's about having developed the capacity to work with difficulty without becoming destabilized by it.
Let's explore what this looks like in practice.
Imagine you're facing a significant challenge. Maybe it's a difficult project at work.
Maybe it's a personal goal that feels overwhelming. Maybe it's a conversation you've been avoiding. Most people approach these situations with a certain amount of anxiety. They're worried about the outcome. They're worried about their performance. They're worried about what failure would mean.
But when you have this internal stability, your relationship with the challenge is different.
You're not pretending it's not difficult. You're not minimizing the stakes.
You're simply approaching it with a calm recognition: this is hard, and I'm going to work through it.
There's no drama in that statement. No inflation. No deflation. Just a clear-eyed assessment and a commitment to engage.
And because you're not spending energy on anxiety or self-doubt or managing your feelings about the challenge, you have more energy available for the actual work.
You're not fighting yourself.
You're not having to overcome internal resistance every step of the way.
You're aligned. Your mind and your actions are pointing in the same direction.
And that alignment is what allows you to be effective even in difficult circumstances. This is the practical advantage of developing a strong mind.
It's not just about feeling better, although that's a benefit. It's about being more capable.
When you're not depleting yourself with internal conflict, when you're not negotiating with yourself at every turn, you have access to your full capacity.
You can think more clearly. You can act more decisively.
You can sustain effort for longer periods. And all of this happens not because you've become superhuman, but because you've removed the obstacles you were placing in your own path.
Now let's talk about the silent root of this confidence. Because understanding where it comes from helps you cultivate it more intentionally. The root is self-trust. And self-trust doesn't come from believing in yourself in some abstract way.
It comes from keeping your word to yourself repeatedly, especially in small things, especially when no one else would know if you didn't follow through. Every time you say you're going to do something and you do it, you're making a deposit into your self-trust account. Every time you honor a commitment to yourself, even when it's inconvenient, even when you don't feel like it, you're strengthening the relationship you have with yourself. And this relationship is the foundation of everything else. Most people don't realize how much they've eroded their own self-trust through years of small betrayals.
They say they'll wake up early, and they don't. They say they'll exercise, and they skip it.
They say they'll work on their project, and they distract themselves instead.
Each instance feels minor. Each instance has a reasonable excuse. But cumulatively, these small betrayals teach you that you can't rely on yourself. They teach you that your word to yourself doesn't mean much. And once you've learned that lesson, it affects everything. You become hesitant to commit to anything significant because somewhere inside, you know you might not follow through. You become dependent on external accountability because you can't trust your own. You become skeptical of your own abilities because you have a track record of not doing what you say you'll do. And all of this happens so gradually that you don't even notice it's happening.
You just notice that you feel less capable, less confident, less sure of yourself than you used to. But here's the beautiful thing. Self-trust can be rebuilt. The same way it was eroded through small betrayals, it can be restored through small commitments kept. You don't need to make grand gestures or dramatic changes. You just need to start keeping your word to yourself in very small ways.
Wake up when you say you will. Do the 5 minutes of work you committed to. Make the call you've been avoiding. Each small promise kept is a repair.
Each one sends a signal to yourself, I'm someone who follows through. I'm someone who can be trusted. And as you rebuild this trust, something shifts in how you move through the world.
You start to feel more solid. More grounded.
Not because circumstances have changed, but because your relationship with yourself has changed.
You're no longer constantly disappointing yourself.
You're no longer living with the low-grade anxiety of knowing you're not keeping your commitments. Instead, you're living with the quiet satisfaction of being someone who does what they say they'll do.
This quiet satisfaction is radically different from the temporary high of external validation. When someone praises you, it feels good, but the feeling fades quickly. You need the next hit of validation to maintain it.
But when you've earned your own respect through consistent action, the feeling is stable.
It doesn't fade because it's not dependent on anyone else's opinion. It's based on your own evidence. And no one can take that away from you. This is what people sense when they encounter someone with genuine confidence. They're not sensing bravado or performance.
They're sensing someone who has a solid relationship with themselves. Someone who isn't looking for external validation because they've cultivated internal validation. Someone who isn't trying to prove anything because they've already proven it to themselves, quietly, through the accumulation of thousands of small choices. Let's go deeper into what this means for how you handle difficulty. When you have this internal foundation, difficult situations don't destabilize you the way they used to. You're not thrown off course by setbacks. You're not derailed by criticism. You're not paralyzed by uncertainty. Not because these things don't affect you, but because you've developed the capacity to experience them without collapsing. When something goes wrong, your internal voice doesn't panic.
It doesn't spiral into catastrophe. Instead, it stays measured. It asks, what can I learn from this? What's my next step? How do I adjust?
This pragmatic orientation is the hallmark of mental resilience.
You're not wasting energy on drama or self-recrimination.
You're directing your energy toward problem solving and adaptation.
And this pragmatism extends to how you think about yourself.
You're not attached to a particular image or identity that needs protecting. You're not invested in being seen as perfect or exceptional.
You're simply committed to showing up and doing the work.
And because you're not protecting an image, you can be honest about your limitations. You can acknowledge when you don't know something.
You can ask for help. You can admit mistakes.
All of this becomes easier when your worth isn't tied to appearing competent. This is paradoxical but true. The more you prove to yourself that you can do hard things, the less you need to prove anything to anyone else.
The validation you've given yourself through action is more substantial than any validation someone else could offer.
And once you've experienced this, the desperate need for external approval begins to fade.
You still appreciate recognition, certainly. You still value connection and feedback. But you don't need it the way you used to. You're complete without it.
This shift affects every area of your life. In relationships, you're no longer seeking someone to make you feel worthy. You already feel worthy based on how you've shown up for yourself. In work, you're no longer deriving your identity from your achievements. You're engaged in the work because it matters to you, not because you need it to validate your existence. In social situations, you're no longer performing or managing impressions. You're simply present, without the constant self-monitoring that exhausts so many people.
And here's what happens when you live this way: life becomes lighter.
Not because your circumstances have necessarily changed, but because you're no longer carrying the weight of self-doubt and self-betrayal.
You're no longer expending energy on internal conflict.
You're no longer exhausting yourself trying to maintain an image or seek validation. That energy is now available for other things.
For creativity. For connection. For contribution. For joy.
This is the true gift of building a strong mind and calm presence.
You're not just becoming more capable. You're becoming more free. Free from the constant inner turmoil that most people accept as normal.
Free from the need to manage other people's opinions. Free from the prison of comfort that keeps so many people trapped in lives smaller than they're capable of living.
And the most remarkable part is that this freedom is available to you right now.
You don't need to wait for perfect circumstances.
You don't need to acquire anything external.
You simply need to start making different choices.
Small choices, repeated over time, that gradually build the foundation we've been talking about. You start by noticing your inner voice. Is it supportive or undermining? Is it steady or anxious?
You don't need to judge it.
Just notice.
Then, slowly, you begin to shift it through action.
Each time you do the hard thing, you're teaching your inner voice a new language. You're teaching it that you're capable. You're teaching it that discomfort is manageable. You're teaching it that you can be trusted.
And as your inner voice shifts, your entire experience of life shifts with it.
Challenges that once felt insurmountable start to feel workable.
Goals that once seemed impossibly distant start to feel achievable. The gap between who you are and who you want to be begins to close, not through dramatic transformation, but through the quiet accumulation of evidence that you're someone who follows through.
This brings us to the closing understanding of this entire journey.
It's counterintuitive, but once you see it, it becomes obvious. The more you choose the hard thing, the easier life becomes. Not because the hard things themselves become easy, but because you become capable of handling increasingly difficult things.
Your baseline shifts. What once challenged you now barely registers.
What once felt impossible now feels merely difficult.
And what feels difficult now will eventually feel manageable. This is not about life becoming effortless. It's about you becoming more capable.
And as your capacity grows, the same life that once felt overwhelming starts to feel navigable.
The same challenges that once paralyzed you become problems you know how to solve.
The same uncertainty that once terrified you becomes a familiar condition you've learned to work within. Think about what this means over the course of years.
Most people spend their lives trying to make things easier by avoiding difficulty.
They seek comfort, they minimize risk, they stay within the boundaries of what feels safe.
And ironically, this approach makes life harder.
Because they never build capacity. They never develop resilience.
So when inevitable difficulties arise, they're unprepared. They don't have the internal resources to handle them.
And what could have been a manageable challenge becomes a crisis. But when you've practiced choosing difficulty, when you've deliberately stepped into discomfort over and over, you've built those internal resources. You have a library of experiences to draw from. You've proven to yourself, in countless small ways, that you can handle hard things. And so when significant challenges arise, you're not starting from zero. You're bringing all that accumulated capacity to bear. The challenge might still be difficult, but you're equipped to meet it. This is why people who consistently do hard things seem to move through life with a certain ease.
They're not exempt from difficulty. They're not living charmed lives where nothing goes wrong.
They've simply built the capacity to work with difficulty effectively. And that capacity, that inner strength, that calm presence in the face of challenge, is available to anyone willing to build it. You build it the same way you build anything worthwhile, through consistent practice over time. Through choosing the hard thing when the easy thing is available.
Through keeping your commitments to yourself even when no one else would know.
Through staying present with discomfort instead of escaping into distraction. Through proving to yourself, again and again, that you're capable of more than you believed. And as you do this, something profound happens.
You stop being afraid of life.
Not because you're naive or reckless, but because you trust yourself to handle whatever comes. You know, based on your own experience, that you can figure things out.
That you can adapt. That you can persist. That you can learn. That you can grow.
And that knowledge, that deep internal knowing, is the foundation of a life lived fully. So here's what I want you to understand as we close: you're not building this capacity for some distant future benefit. You're building it now, in this moment, with every choice you make. Every time you choose the hard thing over the easy thing, you're becoming someone different.
Someone stronger. Someone more capable. Someone more free. And that someone is not a future version of you.
That's who you're becoming right now, with this choice, in this moment.
The path is simple, even if it's not easy. Notice the resistance. Decide in advance. Act despite discomfort. Return when you stumble. Repeat until it becomes who you are.
And trust that as you do this, as you build this habit of choosing the hard thing, life doesn't stay hard.
It becomes workable. It becomes navigable. It becomes yours. You've always had this capacity within you. You're just learning to access it. You're learning to trust it. You're learning to live from it.
And as you do, you'll discover something remarkable: the life you've been waiting to feel ready for is already here. You don't need to wait. You don't need to prepare more. You just need to choose, right now, to do the hard thing.
And then choose again. And again.
Until one day you realize you're no longer choosing. You're simply being the person who does hard things. And from that place, everything changes.
This is not the end of anything. It's the beginning.
The beginning of a life where you trust yourself. Where you don't need external motivation to act. Where difficulty is not something to avoid but something to engage with. Where your inner voice is steady, supportive, and grounded in reality.
Where confidence is not something you seek but something you embody.
Where the hard thing is not your burden but your practice. And from that practice, you build a life.
Not a perfect life. Not an easy life.
But a life that's truly yours. A life where you're no longer waiting for permission or perfect conditions or the right feeling. A life where you show up, you do the work, you handle what comes. A life where you've learned the fundamental truth that transforms everything: as you choose the hard thing, life becomes easier. Not because the challenges disappear, but because you've become someone who can meet them.
And that changes everything. Conclusion: the practice continues. You've reached the end of this book, but not the end of anything that matters. Because what we've been talking about isn't information you consume and move on from. It's not a theory you understand intellectually and then file away. It's a practice. And practices don't end. They deepen. They evolve. They become part of how you move through the world. Let's take a moment to acknowledge where you are right now.
You've spent time exploring ideas about mental resilience, about choosing difficulty, about building the kind of internal stability that most people never develop.
And if you're honest, part of you might be wondering, now what? How do I actually live this? That question is exactly right.
Because the gap between understanding something and embodying it is where most people get lost.
Here's what I want you to know: you don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to feel ready.
You don't need perfect clarity about how to implement everything you've learned.
All you need is a willingness to begin. And beginning doesn't mean overhauling your entire life in a single dramatic gesture. It means making one different choice today. That's all. One choice that's slightly harder than what you would have chosen yesterday. Think about that for a moment. Not 10 choices. Not a complete transformation. Just one choice. Maybe it's getting up when your alarm goes off instead of hitting snooze. Maybe it's doing 5 minutes of the work you've been avoiding.
Maybe it's having a conversation you've been postponing.
The specific choice matters less than the act of choosing. Because each time you make a choice aligned with who you're becoming rather than who you've been, you're casting a vote. And enough votes, accumulated over time, determine the outcome. This is how change actually happens.
Not through inspiration or revelation, but through the quiet repetition of small acts that feel almost insignificant in the moment.
You do the thing. Then you do it again. Then again. And at some point, you look back and realize you're different. Not because of any single moment, but because of the accumulation of moments. Because of the pattern you've been reinforcing through your choices. But let's be honest about what this process feels like. It's not glamorous. It's not dramatic. Most days, it won't feel like you're making progress at all. You'll do the hard thing, and nothing obvious will change. You'll keep your commitment to yourself, and no one will notice.
You'll push through resistance, and there will be no immediate reward.
And this is precisely where most people quit. They expect to feel different. They expect visible results. They expect some kind of confirmation that their effort is working.
But the confirmation comes later.
Much later.
It comes in the moment when you face a challenge that would have paralyzed the old version of you, and you handle it with a calm competence that surprises you. It comes when you realize you haven't negotiated with yourself in weeks because you've simply been doing what you committed to doing.
It comes when someone asks you how you stay so consistent, and you realize you don't even think about it anymore. It's just who you are now. This is the paradox of practice. The results are delayed, but the transformation is happening in real time. Every time you choose the hard thing, you're different. Not in a way you can measure or see, but in a way that matters. You're building neural pathways. You're reinforcing identity. You're proving something to yourself at a level deeper than conscious thought. And all of that internal work is preparing you for the external results that will eventually become visible. So you need patience. Not passive patience that waits for things to happen. Active patience that continues showing up even when you can't see the progress yet.
This is one of the most challenging aspects of any meaningful change, trusting the process when there's no immediate evidence it's working. Trusting that the small choices matter. Trusting that the accumulation is happening even when you can't see it. And here's what helps with that trust: focus on the action, not the outcome. Most people make their actions contingent on outcomes. They think, I'll do this if it leads to that. But that approach keeps you trapped in uncertainty. Because outcomes are never guaranteed. Circumstances change. Variables shift. Things don't always work out the way you planned. And if your commitment is contingent on a specific outcome, your commitment is fragile. But when you focus on the action itself, when you make your commitment about what you control rather than what you don't, everything becomes simpler. You can't control whether you'll lose 20 pounds. But you can control whether you exercise today. You can't control whether your project will succeed. But you can control whether you work on it today. You can't control how other people respond to you. But you can control whether you show up authentically. This shift from outcome to action is liberating. It removes the anxiety that comes from trying to control things you can't control. It removes the disappointment that comes from attaching your worth to results. It removes the paralysis that comes from not knowing whether something will work out. You're no longer asking, will this succeed? You're simply asking, what's the next right action? And that question always has an answer. Now let's talk about what happens when you stumble. Not if. When. Because you will stumble. You'll have days when you don't follow through. Days when the negotiation wins. Days when you choose comfort over growth. And in those moments, you have a choice that's more important than any other. You can interpret the stumble as evidence of failure, as confirmation that you're not capable of change, as a reason to give up. Or you can interpret it as data, as a single moment in a much longer process, as an opportunity to practice returning. Most people don't fail because they stumble. They fail because they quit after they stumble. They take one missed workout, one skipped commitment, one moment of weakness, and they use it as justification to abandon the entire practice. They tell themselves, see? I knew I couldn't do this. I knew I'd fail. Why even try? And in that moment of self-abandonment, they reinforce the very pattern they're trying to break. But you can do something different. You can stumble and then stand back up. Not with shame. Not with self-punishment. Not with a grand declaration that this time will be different. Just with a quiet return to the practice. You notice you stumbled. You acknowledge what happened without dramatizing it. And then you make the next choice aligned with who you're becoming. That's all. The stumble doesn't erase everything that came before it. It's just a moment. And the moment after it is another opportunity to choose. This ability to return after stumbling is what separates people who achieve lasting change from people who remain stuck in cycles of starting and stopping. It's not that successful people never stumble. It's that they've learned to stumble without collapsing. They've learned that a single choice doesn't define them. The pattern defines them. And the pattern is built over time through consistency, not perfection. So give yourself permission to be imperfect. Give yourself permission to have days when you don't show up the way you intended. Give yourself permission to be human. And then practice returning. Practice getting back to the work without making it mean something catastrophic about your character or your capacity. This practice of returning is just as important as the practice of showing up in the first place. As you move forward from here, you're going to encounter resistance you haven't experienced yet. New forms of negotiation. Subtler ways your mind will try to pull you back toward comfort. This is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're growing. Your system is adjusting to a new baseline, and that adjustment creates friction. Expect it. Welcome it, even. Because the presence of resistance means you're at your edge. And your edge is where growth happens. You're also going to encounter moments of doubt. Moments when you question whether any of this matters. Moments when the old patterns seem more appealing than the new ones you're building. Moments when you wonder if you should just accept yourself as you are instead of constantly trying to change. And here's what I want you to understand about those moments: they're not insights. They're tests. Your mind is checking to see if you're serious about this. And how you respond to those moments determines everything. When doubt arrives, you don't need to fight it. You don't need to suppress it or pretend it isn't there. You can acknowledge it. I'm feeling doubt right now. That's normal. That's part of the process. And then you can act anyway. Not because the doubt has gone away, but because you've decided that doubt doesn't determine your actions.
You've decided that you're someone who continues even when you're not sure. Even when it's hard. Even when you can't see the finish line. This is what mental resilience actually looks like in practice.
It's not the absence of doubt or fear or resistance. It's the presence of capacity to continue despite those things. And that capacity is built through exactly what you've been learning: choosing the hard thing, managing behavior in moments of resistance, noticing the internal negotiations, making difficulty automatic through repetition. Everything we've explored in this book comes down to a simple truth: you become what you practice. If you practice avoiding discomfort, you become someone who can't tolerate discomfort. If you practice negotiating yourself out of commitments, you become someone who can't trust themselves. If you practice waiting for the right moment, you become someone who's always waiting. But if you practice choosing difficulty, you become someone who can do hard things. If you practice keeping commitments to yourself, you become someone who trusts themselves. If you practice acting despite discomfort, you become someone who doesn't need perfect conditions to move forward. This is not mystical or theoretical. It's neurology. It's how brains work. Every repeated action strengthens the neural pathways associated with that action. Every repeated thought makes that thought more likely to occur again. You're always practicing something. The question is whether you're practicing what you want to become or what you want to leave behind. And here's the most important thing I can tell you as we close: you don't need anything else. You don't need more information. You don't need a better plan. You don't need perfect conditions. You have everything you need right now to begin. The knowledge is here. The capacity is within you. All that's missing is the decision to start and the commitment to continue. So decide now. Not in a vague, someday kind of way. Right now. Decide what one thing you're going to do differently today. Decide what commitment you're going to honor that you would have previously negotiated out of. Decide what hard thing you're going to choose instead of the easy thing. Make it small. Make it specific. Make it something you can do today. And then tomorrow, do it again. And the day after that, do it again. Don't worry about next week or next month or next year. Just focus on today. On this moment. On this choice. Because this moment is all you ever have. And in this moment, you're either reinforcing the old pattern or building a new one. You're either becoming who you've always been or becoming who you're capable of being. The work continues. It always continues. There's no point at which you arrive and the practice is finished. But that's not a burden. That's the beauty of it. You're never done growing. You're never done expanding your capacity. You're never done discovering what you're capable of. And that means your life can keep getting richer, deeper, more fully lived for as long as you're willing to keep choosing the hard thing. So take what you've learned here and put it into practice. Not someday. Today. Start small. Be consistent. Notice the resistance. Act anyway. Return when you stumble. Trust the process even when you can't see the results. And know that with each choice, with each moment of choosing difficulty over ease, you're building something that no one can take from you. A strong mind and a calm presence. The capacity to rely on yourself regardless of circumstance. The confidence that comes from keeping your word to yourself. This is your work now. This is your practice. And through this practice, you're not just changing what you do. You're changing who you are. One choice at a time. One moment at a time. One day at a time. Until one day, you look back and realize you've become someone you barely recognize. Someone stronger. Someone more capable. Someone who does hard things not because they have to, but because that's simply who they are. The practice continues. And so do you.